Well, to help us understand what this ruling means, we're now joined by Senior Research Fellow and Political Economist at the trade collective, Lebohang Pheko. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Peter, and to the viewers.
Was this decision a surprise? I've got to be honest, I was quite surprised. One would have thought that a former Deputy Chief Justice of that Constitutional Court saying that these elections will not be free and fair maybe tipped it in that direction, but it seems the law is the law.
It seems the law is the law, and it seems that constitutionality is constitutionality, and that is going to trump the pandemic, the COVID crisis. But this isn't really the only question. The question is whether these elections and any elections at any given time are going to be able to convey the sort of confidence, transparency, and credibility that is required to ensure that the transaction of shift of power from one party to the other or from one regime to the other is seen as being credible and is seen as being authentic in the eyes of electors in particular. And I suppose one of the things that's quite, pressurizing is that the COVID-19 pandemic has placed South Africa, among many other countries, under pressure to try to increase their credibility, to do the campaigning, but also, to adapt methodologies. Adaptability has been one of the key issues in countries that have called for elections. And of course, we're not the only ones who have gone through this. I mean, Zambia just went through a successful election, and perhaps that's one of the reasons that it has been viewed as being possible, as being quite viable to be able to run elections, particularly because countries that have potentially fewer resources than South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, have managed to run indeed credible and successful elections quite recently.
Yeah, Malawi, Burundi, all during COVID-19. Okay, so, and also I guess everybody faces the same hurdle. So it's not as if one party is advantaged and another disadvantaged by this ruling.
No, it's not. But I do think that it's important to note that the parties which are usually better resourced, and that there are already there are issues with the way the resource allocation, party resource allocation, which is along electoral votes. So that means that the parties that have received the largest amount of votes historically will remain the ones with the largest allocation, which I think is quite problematic in any case. But other than that, it also means that parties which are smaller or which have a smaller electoral mandate or electoral base are not able to attract as much. So the parties which have already been quite hampered will continue to be hampered. I do suspect that larger parties or parties with a large electoral vote are going to be able to remobilize and to rethink their methodologies. But certainly, I think that all parties have to think around how to use social media, how to go door to door, how to engage with citizenry and voters in ways that are dynamic. And I do think that the opportunities for busing people into the stadiums have been minimized during the COVID crisis. And that might not be a bad thing. It might not be a bad thing to see political parties engaging in rigorous, robust debate and giving us a real rundown of what their manifestos are, including at local government level. I think it's been a long time since we have been given the sort of real robust debate and real robust insights into what party political formations are intending to do as part of their mandate. And rather than, the kind of the performative aspects of electioneering and of election campaigning, this might be actually an opportunity to go back to basics.
So the election is about the voter, actually, at the end of the day. Political parties, yes, they contest, but democracy is about citizens. Have we as citizens been compromised because we won't perhaps hear as much as we could have heard had campaigning and all those kinds of things been allowed?
What have we been hearing in the past? I think that's the first sort of response to the question that you pose. Have we been hearing enough to make viable decisions? Have we been hearing enough to think creatively out of the box about what kind of parties appeal to us as voters? I think there's kind of been a blind faith in electoral processes and a blind faith in the ballot box. And yet the ultimate base on which popular sovereignty and popular democracy rests can really be seen most vividly in the ways in which people react and respond on election day. And that's been quite sluggish in this country over the last few elections, as we're aware. I mean, really diminishing numbers of interest. So what is what we've been hearing even previous to this, Peter, and the viewers, been convincing enough to encourage us to engage in this process? And I think we need to be asking, and perhaps the states, the government, party political formations need to be asking what the people want, whether elections are in any case the most vibrant, most dynamic reflection of voter aspirations. Because every now and again we see that after elections have taken place, there are insurrections, service delivery protests, and they're usually lazily characterized and so forth. So there seems to be a disconnect in any case between the democratic dividend and the electoral process. So whatever we may or may not have heard previous, I'm not sure that it was ever that convincing or whether it was enough to have an engaged citizenry.
All right, you said earlier that, these parties have got to go back to basics. And the COVID-19 scenario doesn't allow for you to be knocking on everybody's door, for example. And so if your masses do not have access to data, they're not going to get your message either from social media. They've been relying on rallies, meetings and gatherings. How do we compensate for that? Because if I'm sitting somewhere in the rural areas, I don't have a phone, how will I know who to vote for?
Yeah, but Peter, what happened to radios, bruh? What happened to good old radio announcements? What happened to in several linguistic forms as well? What happened to TV? Most people have access to a telly. Most people have access to a radio. And I think that this is where the sort of debates and the sort of messaging that you were asking about in your previous question would be best played out. This is also probably the opportunity for different political parties to begin to engage with the public on radio and on TV, but on radio. Make use of the platforms. You guys also have a role to play in this regard in the media and as journalists in facilitating much more inclusive, interactive conversations between parties, between their ideas, and between the people who want to engage with those ideas. And I do think that there's scope to think out of the box. Good old-fashioned radio in taxis, for example, running the manifestos in different languages. There are so many things that we did. For example, post-1994, I remember that the process for popularizing the Constitution was firstly very, very participatory and extremely accessible to a broad range of constituents in this country. There was a particular need to ensure that the messaging of what this Constitution did and did not mean got across. And I mean, whether or not what came out of that was a series of compromises, etc., I do think that the process of trying to engage in that constitutional debate at the time in what is today called the Constitution of South Africa was a really important template of what a popular, inexpensive, mass-based approach to reaching people, and which is not based on data, on people, and on social hierarchies and on class hierarchies, could potentially look like.
All right, so for you, this ruling is fine. We're definitely going to have a free and fair election that will deliver a result which reflects the will of the people.
I didn't say the ruling was fine, nor did I say it's definitely going to deliver the will of the people. I have my own discomforts about the elections as the be all and end all. But I am saying it is what it is, folks. And I am saying that party political formations need to work with what they have. And I would like to reiterate that we're not the only ones, right? So, I mean, countries across the world, as you rightly said, even in our region, have had to adjust. I mean, Uganda had an election. As we know, local elections in the Bahamas had to be postponed. Local elections, I think, elections in Bolivia. It's everywhere. In Chile, and this is across income levels. Countries which are in a similar LSM as ours. Countries which are, in fact, sometimes have a much lower resource base to spend. Much less extra to go around to spend. So I am saying that under the circumstances, it is what it is, and I think that that party political formations need to be much more creative about how to engage with the people and to up their game, to create a message which is engaging, which is convincing, and which is compelling to build a credible process.
A huge casualty of this, and this is partly because they took time to organize themselves and register their candidates, is the ANC. And there's going to be a good number of municipalities where they just won't appear on the ballot box.
Absolutely, and I think that again that should, for other political parties, create an opportunity. This vacuum, such as it may be, is actually an opportunity to then think around how they can then engage with people differently. And remember that in this country, there are several political parties which don't have a national presence. Peter, there are many parties which are known in places like Matatiele, like Free State, Dikongwetla, which is a Free State driven party in particular. There are several which have really strong footprints, and this might be the opportunity for them to enlarge that footprint. And remember that local government is really the coal face of where stuff happens. You know, where roads must be built, houses must be built, lights must be kept on. Even though there are co-competent responsibilities between province and local government in particular, I do think that if any party is able to prove themselves and to provide a compelling message at local government level, it augurs very well for a national footprint. And I also think that there are some parties, by the way, which are very effective at local government. I don't necessarily personally think that every party should aspire to a national footprint because they may be extremely effective in their particular constituency. So the absence of the ANC on some of those voter rolls, those ballot papers, then should provide a deeper inroad potentially for these other formations. I think it's quite exciting.
All right, and perhaps as a final question, COVID-19 has disrupted so many things and that will never be the same again. Is there something for the IEC itself in this, in that in the next elections, general elections, could electronic voting be something that needs to come in? Because now we know the limitations, especially during times of crisis and difficulty. Could this be an opportunity to shift into the next phase of election processing?
You're quite right. So, I mean, there certainly has been a call towards biometric voting already, electronic voting, although that's not without its own concerns around the back end of it. How you ensure that there's the end-to-end user frame doesn't enable any votes to go missing en route to whichever electoral authority needs to count and calibrate the votes. But yes, I think that certainly we have to think beyond these sorts of crisis moments, because there might always be one crisis or another in the future. And by the way, also, we also have to think about the circumstances under which the Constitution could allow or disallow voting to take place in times of war, in times of pandemic, in times of crisis that are sometimes, force majeure, as they would say. What should that look like? So I think there's a couple of conversations between how the IEC responds to this going forward, how the Constitution responds to this going forward, because remember that a Constitution, it should be a living document. It should be a document that reflects the challenges, the aspirations, the realities of life as we live it, not only as we would like it to be.
Lebohang Pheko, thank you very much indeed. Always great getting your insights and your thoughts on these issues. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.